Edit. If you have one final truth to speak, Omega, speak it now. Evelyn Carter lifted her head as the entire Judgment Square fell silent. Cold morning wind moved through the stone courtyard, carrying the distant sound of bells across the Capitol. Thousands had gathered behind the barriers, yet Evelyn searched none of their faces for mercy. She had learned during 3 weeks of captivity that people who believed a written accusation rarely wanted the truth behind it. Her hands rested calmly before her as Chancellor Marcus Hale watched from the raised council platform. According to the charges, Evelyn had stolen classified royal documents and attempted to deliver them beyond the kingdom. She had never seen those documents. No one had allowed her to examine the evidence. Still, the judgment had come quickly. Do you understand the sentence? Marcus asked. Evelyn looked directly at him. I understand what you decided. A murmur passed through the crowd. Marcus ignored it. High above the square, King Adrian Blackwood stood beneath the shadow of the royal balcony, observing the proceedings with a growing sense that something was wrong. He had reviewed hundreds of criminal judgments during his reign. This one had reached his desk already approved, carrying emergency authorization from Marcus and 3 senior council members. Adrian had almost delayed it. Almost. Now he watched the young woman below and wondered why she showed no fear of the ending everyone expected her to face. Evelyn closed her eyes. Her mother had taught her one song when she was 8 years old and then forbidden her from ever singing it again. Never where an alpha can hear you, her mother had warned. Evelyn had never understood why. Her mother disappeared 2 years later, taking the explanation with her. Now, with nothing left to protect except the truth of who she had been, Evelyn drew a slow breath and began to sing. The melody was quiet at first, carrying through the square with an ancient sadness that seemed older than the palace itself. Conversation stopped. Even the bells appeared distant. Adrian's body went completely still. Something deep inside him recognized the melody before his mind did. His wolf surged awake with such force that he gripped the stone railing. A second line left Evelyn's lips. Adrian suddenly remembered moonlight through a bedroom window, his own frightened breathing, and a woman's voice singing the same impossible song 20 years earlier. Then his wolf howled. The sound tore through the silence of the square, powerful enough to make every face turn toward the royal balcony. Evelyn stopped singing and opened her eyes. Marcus looked up in alarm. Adrian barely heard the shocked whispers around him. He was staring at Evelyn as a memory he had buried since childhood returned piece by piece. A silver-haired woman beside his bed. A hand held several inches above his forehead without touching him. That melody calming the wild panic inside him. And one sentence whispered before she disappeared before sunrise. If you ever hear this song again, protect the person singing it long enough to learn the truth. Adrian stepped forward. Stop the judgment. Marcus immediately rose. Your Majesty, the sentence has already been authorized. Adrian descended the balcony stairs without looking away from Evelyn. Then I am authorizing something else. He crossed the square as guards and council officials watched in stunned silence. Evelyn remained where she stood, uncertain whether the king had just saved her or placed her inside a mystery even more dangerous than the accusation against her. Adrian stopped several feet away. His wolf had become completely silent now, listening. Who taught you that song? He asked. Evelyn studied his face. My mother. Adrian felt the past shift beneath his feet. What was her name? Evelyn hesitated before answering. Sarah Carter. For the first time in 20 years, the Alpha King remembered the name of the woman who had vanished from the palace the night she saved him. And as Marcus Hale quietly stepped backward on the council platform, Adrian realized something else. The Chancellor already knew exactly who Evelyn was. Adrian did not look away from Marcus. The Chancellor had controlled his expression quickly, but not quickly enough. That single backward step had told Adrian more than any denial could. Clear the square, the king ordered. Marcus descended from the council platform. Your Majesty, delaying a lawful judgment because of an unexplained reaction creates a dangerous precedent. Adrian turned toward him. Then explain your reaction. Marcus stopped. I do not understand. You recognized Sarah Carter's name. I recognized nothing. Evelyn watched the exchange carefully. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had personally questioned her about her mother, although he had claimed the questions were routine. At the time, Evelyn had thought nothing of it. Now every conversation felt different. Adrian instructed Captain Daniel Reed to transfer Evelyn to a protected guest wing while the case was reopened. She is still under judgment, Marcus objected. She is under investigation, Adrian replied. There is a difference. Evelyn expected guards to surround her, but Adrian ordered them to maintain distance. She followed Reed across the palace courtyard while the crowd slowly dispersed behind them. The death hymn still echoed inside her mind. Her mother had warned her never to sing it near an alpha. She had always assumed the warning came from superstition. Now the most powerful alpha in the kingdom had stopped an entire public judgment after hearing only 2 lines. By noon, Adrian was inside the royal records office with Reed and 2 independent archivists. Evelyn's official file lay open before them. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Evelyn Carter, 25 years old, born in North Hollow, registered Omega, no criminal history before the current charges. Adrian turned back several pages and noticed the registration date. She was 17 when this designation was entered. One archivist nodded. That is unusual. Most designations are recorded much earlier. Reed requested the original childhood registry. The system returned an older file. Evelyn Carter, registered beta. Adrian stared at the screen. 2 different designations. There is more, Reed said. The beta record had been sealed 9 years earlier under emergency authority. The authorization belonged to an office supervised by Marcus Hale. Adrian immediately requested the evidence from Evelyn's treason case. The response arrived minutes later. Restricted by council security order. Again, Marcus Hale's authorization. That afternoon, Adrian visited Evelyn in the protected wing. She stood near the window, still wearing the plain gray clothing she had been given during captivity. She turned when he entered, but did not bow. Adrian appreciated that. Your childhood records identify you as a beta, he said. Evelyn's expression changed. That is what my mother told everyone. But you knew you were an Omega. Since I was 13. Adrian considered the timeline. Your mother disappeared when you were 10. Evelyn nodded. She left instructions with someone I trusted. I was told to hide what I was and never sing that song. Did she explain why? No, Adrian placed a copy of the altered registry on the table. Someone changed your official designation when you were 17. Evelyn looked at the authorization number. I did not request that. I know. She raised her eyes. Then who did? Adrian did not answer immediately. Marcus Hale's office approved the change. Silence settled between them. Evelyn slowly sat down. He knew about me 8 years ago. Possibly longer. Adrian studied her reaction. His wolf remained strangely attentive but calm. It did not demand possession or proximity. It simply recognized something Adrian could not yet understand. Evelyn looked toward him. Why did your wolf howl? I do not know. That is not true. Adrian was silent for a moment. When I was 15, I became seriously ill during my first uncontrolled shift. One night, a woman entered my room and sang the same melody. My wolf became calm. Evelyn's face lost color. You think that woman was my mother. I think Sarah Carter was inside this palace 20 years ago, and someone has spent years making certain neither of us understood why. A knock sounded at the door. Reed entered carrying a sealed document recovered from an inactive royal archive. Your Majesty, we found the original order connected to Evelyn's childhood record. Adrian opened it. Most of the page had been redacted, but one sentence remained visible. Subject EC. Must never be allowed direct proximity to Crown Heir Adrian Blackwood. Evelyn read the line twice. Then she noticed the signature at the bottom. Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale's signature changed the room. Evelyn stared at it until the letters seemed less like a name and more like a warning that had followed her through most of her life. Why would he order me kept away from you when I was a child? She asked. Adrian read the document again. That is what we are going to find out. Reed examined the authorization code and discovered that the order belonged to a discontinued royal program whose records had been removed from the main archive 18 years earlier. Only one reference remained. A symbol shaped like 3 crescent lines surrounding a small circle. Evelyn immediately recognized it. My mother had that symbol. Adrian looked at her. Where? On a silver pendant. She wore it every day. Evelyn closed her eyes, reaching into memories she had spent years trying not to disturb. The night before she disappeared, she gave it to me. Someone took it when I was arrested. Reed promised to locate her personal belongings. Adrian turned toward the window, troubled by another memory. The woman who had entered his room 20 years ago had worn something silver around her neck. He could not remember its shape, only the way it caught the moonlight as she sang. "There is something I need to test," Adrian said. Evelyn immediately became guarded. "What kind of test?" "Nothing you do not choose." His answer came quickly. "You said your mother taught you more than the 2 lines you sang this morning." Evelyn nodded slowly. "The entire hymn. When she sang it to me, I was barely conscious. I remember only fragments. If you are willing to sing another part, it may bring back something useful." Evelyn looked at him for several seconds. "And if your wolf reacts again? Then I remain responsible for what I do." The simplicity of his answer surprised her. She had spent her life hearing warnings about alpha instinct as though it were a force no one could question. Adrian spoke of it as something powerful but not sovereign. Reed stepped outside to give them privacy while remaining near the door. Evelyn stood beside the window and drew a careful breath. "Only one verse." Adrian nodded. She began softly. The melody was different from the opening she had sung in the square. Slower, almost comforting. Adrian's wolf stirred immediately, but there was no loss of control. Instead, memory returned. A dark bedroom, rain against the windows, his father arguing with someone in the hallway, Sarah Carter kneeling several feet from Adrian's bed, refusing to come closer despite being ordered to. Then her voice. "He is not dangerous. He is afraid." Adrian's eyes opened sharply. Evelyn stopped singing. "What happened?" "I remember her." His voice was quiet. "My mother. She was protecting me." Another fragment surfaced. Marcus, younger but unmistakable, standing in the doorway. A physician beside him holding a folder marked with the same crescent symbol. Sarah had looked directly at Marcus and said, "You cannot build a program around children." Adrian stepped away from the window. "Your mother was not brought to the palace to treat me. She was working against something happening here." Evelyn felt the meaning settle heavily between them. And Marcus was part of it. Before Adrian could answer, Reed returned carrying a small evidence box. Inside were Evelyn's belongings from the day of her arrest. Her coat, her watch, a few coins, no pendant. "It is missing," Evelyn said. Reed checked the inventory sheet. "There is no pendant listed." Evelyn's expression hardened. "I was wearing it when they took me." Adrian examined the arrest authorization. Marcus had personally assigned the officers responsible for processing her belongings. "He wanted the pendant," Adrian said. Evelyn suddenly remembered something else. There were words engraved on the back. "What words?" Adrian asked. She closed her eyes. Her mother had made her repeat them until she could remember them without looking. "Where the first king prayed, the hidden voices remain." Adrian went completely still. Beneath the oldest section of the palace stood a chapel abandoned for nearly a century. According to royal history, the first Blackwood king had built it before the capital existed. Adrian looked toward Reed. "Seal the old chapel." Quietly. Evelyn understood immediately. "You think the symbol leads there. I think your mother left you a map." At that exact moment, elsewhere in the palace, Marcus Hale opened his desk and removed a silver pendant bearing 3 crescent lines around a small circle. He turned it over, read the engraved words, and realized Evelyn had finally remembered where the truth was buried. The old chapel had no place on modern palace maps. Adrian remembered it only because his grandfather had once shown him the sealed entrance and described it as a forgotten piece of Blackwood history. Less than an hour after Evelyn remembered the inscription, she followed Adrian and Captain Reed through a narrow corridor beneath the western wing. The air became colder as they descended nearly 40 feet below the palace. At the bottom stood 2 ancient wooden doors covered with faded carvings. Evelyn stopped immediately. 3 crescent lines surrounded a small circle above the entrance. "That is the symbol." Reed checked the doors. "No sign anyone has entered recently." Adrian studied the stone walls. "Then Marcus may not know exactly what we are looking for." Evelyn wished she could believe that. Her missing pendant suggested otherwise. They entered the chapel and found rows of empty benches facing a simple stone platform. Nothing appeared unusual until Evelyn noticed that the crescent symbol had been carved repeatedly along one wall. Beneath each symbol were lines that resembled musical notation. She moved closer. "These are not decorations." Adrian joined her. "You recognize them?" "My mother taught me to read music before she taught me the hymn." Evelyn traced the pattern without touching the stone. "These notes match the melody, but some are deliberately wrong." Reed frowned. "Why?" Evelyn studied the sequence. Every incorrect note corresponded to a letter carved beneath the next symbol. She followed the pattern across the wall until the letters formed a sentence. First voice opens what silence protects. Adrian looked toward the chapel. First voice. Evelyn understood. The opening verse. She hesitated. If I sing it, your wolf may react. Adrian remained several feet away. My reaction is my responsibility. Evelyn nodded and began the first verse quietly. Her voice traveled through the underground chapel, soft but clear. Adrian's wolf immediately became alert, yet he remained perfectly still. As the final note faded, a low mechanical sound came from behind the stone platform. A narrow section of the wall shifted inward, revealing a hidden passage. Reed stared at it. That mechanism is at least a century old. Then the program did not create this place, Evelyn said. They found it. Inside the passage stood a small circular chamber lined with shelves. Most were empty, but one contained a wooden box marked with the crescent symbol. Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten journals, photographs, and dozens of musical pages. One photograph showed several women standing outside the chapel nearly 30 years earlier. Sarah Carter was among them. Evelyn touched the edge of the picture. Her mother looked younger than Evelyn was now. Adrian examined another photograph and recognized his own mother standing beside Sarah. My mother knew her. Evelyn looked at him. Then why was all of this hidden? Reed opened the first journal. The answer appeared on the opening page. The Crescent Circle was not a research program. It had originally been a network created by Omegas who discovered that certain inherited vocal patterns could calm distressed wolves. They had shared the songs voluntarily during periods of conflict, but generations later, royal advisors began studying the ability as a political resource. Adrian read silently, his expression darkening. They turned a tradition into a system of control. Evelyn opened another journal. A list of names appeared beside compatibility classifications. Her own name was near the bottom. Across from it stood Adrian Blackwood. Predicted resonance. Exceptional. She stepped backward. They knew. Adrian looked at the date. This was written before you were born. How is that possible? Reed found a genetic projection report attached to the journal. The program had tracked family lines for generations, predicting potential resonance before children even existed. Evelyn felt suddenly exposed by a decision made decades before her birth. Adrian closed the file. A prediction is not a destiny. Before Evelyn could respond, footsteps sounded beyond the hidden passage. Reed moved toward the entrance, but the person who appeared was not Marcus. An elderly palace archivist stood there holding Evelyn's missing silver pendant. I believe this belongs to you, she said. Evelyn stared at the woman. Where did you get that? The archivist placed it carefully on the table. Chancellor Hale gave it to me 20 years ago with instructions to destroy it if Sarah Carter ever returned. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Why did you keep it? The woman looked at Evelyn. Because Sarah told me one day her daughter would come here. She opened the pendant, revealing a compartment Evelyn had never known existed. Inside was a tiny folded strip of paper containing 4 words in Sarah's handwriting. Marcus chose the final subject. Evelyn looked toward Adrian. The meaning was immediate and terrifying. Marcus had not merely known about the program. He had personally selected Evelyn for whatever came next. The 4 words in Sarah's handwriting changed the meaning of everything Evelyn had discovered. Marcus chose the final subject. She read the sentence again while Adrian examined the journal spread across the hidden chamber. Final subject for what? Evelyn asked. The elderly archivist, Margaret Ellis, lowered her eyes. I never knew the entire plan. Sarah trusted information carefully after she realized the program had been compromised. Adrian looked at her. Compromised by Marcus? Margaret nodded. He believed resonance could solve what he called the instability of royal succession. Sarah believed no child should be assigned a future before understanding what choice meant. Evelyn looked toward the compatibility record bearing her name beside Adrian's. But someone assigned mine before I was born. Margaret's expression softened. A prediction was made. Your mother spent years making sure it never became an order. Reed began examining the dates in the journals. One entry stood out. It had been written shortly before Sarah disappeared. The final resonance candidate has been identified. M.H. insists public confirmation will eventually be necessary. Adrian read the sentence twice. Public confirmation. Evelyn thought about the judgment square. Thousands of witnesses. Council officials. The royal balcony. Her death hymn. Adrian's wolf responding where everyone could hear it. The execution was the test, she said quietly. Reed looked up. Evelyn continued. Marcus did not expect me to disappear quietly. He expected me to sing. How could he know you would? Adrian asked. Evelyn touched the pendant. Because he knew my mother taught me the hymn. He knew that if I believed I had reached my final moment, I might use the only farewell she ever gave me. Adrian's expression hardened. The accusation against Evelyn, the rushed judgment, the public setting, even his own attendance had been arranged too perfectly. Marcus had not merely placed Evelyn before the king. He had constructed circumstances designed to force an emotional response from both of them. Reed searched the case records through his secure tablet. The judgment was originally scheduled for a private council chamber. Adrian turned toward him. Who changed the location? Reed already knew the answer before the authorization appeared. Marcus Hale. Evelyn felt a cold clarity settle over her. He wanted witnesses. Adrian nodded. He needed the kingdom to see my wolf react to you. Margaret opened another journal and found a page Sarah had marked with red ink. There may be more. The entry described Marcus's proposed final phase. If exceptional resonance could be demonstrated publicly between an Omega and a future ruler, the council could classify the Omega as essential to royal stability. Such a classification would allow permanent supervision, restricted movement, and controlled access to the monarch. Evelyn stared at the page. He wanted to turn me into a royal resource. And use your existence to control me, Adrian said. The plan suddenly became clear. If Adrian resisted separation from Evelyn, Marcus could claim the king was dependent on her. If Adrian rejected her, Marcus could control access to the one person capable of calming his wolf. Either outcome gave the council leverage over the crown. Evelyn closed the journal. Then why accuse me of treason? Why risk losing me? Because you were never going to die, Margaret said. Everyone turned toward her. She pointed to a coded notation beside Evelyn's judgment order. This symbol means intervention required before completion. I saw it used in the old program. Evelyn understood with growing disbelief. The entire execution had been theater. Marcus had known Adrian's wolf would respond. He had expected the king to stop the proceedings, creating exactly the public evidence he needed. Adrian walked slowly toward the chamber wall, reconstructing every moment. He knew I would hear the hymn. Evelyn looked at him. And he knew your wolf would answer. Silence followed. Then Reed's phone received an urgent message from the palace. He read it and immediately handed the screen to Adrian. Marcus had called an emergency council session for the following morning. The official agenda contained one item: investigation into whether King Adrian Blackwood remained capable of independent judgment after confirmed exposure to an exceptional resonance Omega. Evelyn looked at the document, finally understanding the scale of the trap. Marcus had never intended her execution to be the end of his plan. It had been the beginning. By midnight, the hidden chamber beneath the chapel had become a temporary war room. Journals, photographs, authorization records, and old program files covered the stone table while Adrian, Evelyn, Reed, and Margaret reconstructed a plan that had begun before Evelyn was born. The evidence proved Marcus had studied resonance, manipulated records, and arranged the public judgment. But one question remained unanswered. Why had he waited until now? Reed found the answer buried inside a council memorandum dated 6 months earlier. Tomorrow is not only an emergency hearing, he said. The council was already scheduled to vote on the Royal Independence Act. Evelyn looked toward Adrian. What does that change? Adrian read the memorandum. It would reduce the council's authority to intervene in decisions made directly by the crown. Margaret understood immediately. If Marcus convinces them you are vulnerable to resonance before the vote, the act will fail. More than that, Reed said. He opened another document. The existing stability laws allow the council to appoint temporary oversight if a monarch is judged incapable of independent decision-making. Evelyn stared at the page. Marcus had designed a trap with 2 targets. She would become a controlled resource, and Adrian would become a king whose authority existed only with council approval. Then we show them these records tomorrow, she said. Adrian shook his head. Not yet. Evelyn frowned. Why? Because Marcus has spent 20 years preparing for someone to discover this room. If we reveal incomplete evidence, he will call the journals historical speculation and claimed the judgment changes were security decisions. Reed reluctantly agreed. We need proof connecting him directly to the current operation. Evelyn looked around the chamber. The pendant. Margaret had returned it to her, and Evelyn now opened the hidden compartment again. The small note from Sarah seemed simple, but the handwriting on the reverse side contained a sequence of musical marks almost invisible with age. Evelyn carried it beneath the nearest lamp. This is part of the hymn. Margaret moved closer. Sarah used music as a cipher. Evelyn quietly followed the notes in her mind. They did not form a complete verse. They formed directions. Third bell. Northern Archive. Black Ledger. Reed checked the time. The palace bells would sound 3 times at 1 in the morning. Adrian ordered no guards beyond Reed. If Marcus was monitoring official security movements, a larger search would warn him. At the third bell, they entered the Northern Archive through an unused records corridor. Evelyn found the Black Ledger behind a row of royal tax volumes. Inside were payments made through private foundations for 20 years. One recent entry carried the same reference number as Evelyn's arrest order. Another payment had been issued to the officer who submitted the false treason evidence against her. Reed photographed every page. This connects Marcus directly to your case. Adrian turned another page and stopped. There were payments connected to him as well. Physicians, tutors, security advisors, people who had surrounded him since childhood. Beside several names appeared the same phrase, behavioral observation. Adrian's face became unreadable. They were studying me too. Evelyn looked at him. Until that moment, she had thought of herself as the subject and Adrian as the intended political prize. Now she understood that Marcus had treated both of them as pieces in the same experiment. Reed found a sealed envelope inside the ledger. It contained a report written 20 years earlier describing Adrian's first uncontrolled shift and Sarah's successful use of vocal resonance. At the bottom was Marcus's recommendation. Identify a compatible Omega from the Carter bloodline and preserve the subject for future royal stabilization. Evelyn felt the words like a door closing around her childhood. Adrian immediately placed the report down. You are not what this document calls you. Neither are you, she replied. Their eyes met across the table. For the first time, they understood the same truth from opposite sides. Marcus had not simply planned their meeting. He had spent decades waiting for them to become exactly what his records predicted. Reed turned to the final page of the ledger and discovered a list of 12 Omega candidates tested against Adrian's hereditary profile. 11 names had been rejected. The 12th was Evelyn Carter. Beside her name, Marcus had written one word. Confirmed. Evelyn stared at it. How could he confirm anything when Adrian and I had never met? Margaret answered quietly. Perhaps you did. Evelyn looked at her. Margaret opened an old photograph from the hidden archive. It showed a palace garden 20 years earlier. 15-year-old Adrian stood in the background beside Sarah Carter. Near Sarah's hand was a small 5-year-old girl with chestnut hair. Evelyn recognized the coat immediately from an old childhood photograph. Adrian stared at the image as a forgotten memory returned. A little girl humming beside a fountain. His frightened wolf becoming quiet before Sarah ever entered his room that night. Marcus had not predicted their resonance. He had tested it when they were children. The photograph remained on the table between them, turning a forgotten afternoon into evidence of a decision neither Evelyn nor Adrian had been old enough to understand. Evelyn studied the 5-year-old girl beside Sarah and slowly remembered the fountain, the white stone birds around its edge, and a teenage boy sitting alone beneath an oak tree. She had been humming because her mother told her to stay calm while adults argued inside the palace. I remember you, she said. Adrian looked at her. I remember the song. The distinction mattered. Neither of them remembered choosing the meeting because there had been no choice to make. Marcus had arranged proximity, observed Adrian's response, and recorded a conclusion that would shape both of their lives. Margaret opened another journal from Sarah's collection. Several pages had been removed, but the remaining entry was clear. Marcus believes compatibility creates obligation. I believe recognition without freedom is merely another form of control. Evelyn read the sentence twice. My mother discovered what he intended. Reed nodded. That may explain why she disappeared. Adrian examined the dates. Sarah vanished less than 2 weeks after the childhood test. Soon afterward, Evelyn's records were sealed, and Adrian's physicians were replaced by advisors selected through Marcus's office. He separated us, Adrian said, until he needed us together again. Morning was approaching, and the emergency council session was less than 6 hours away. Reed suggested securing the evidence immediately, but Evelyn remained focused on one missing piece. If Marcus already confirmed the resonance 20 years ago, why stage another public test now? Adrian understood her concern. Because childhood evidence would not be enough to challenge a reigning king. Margaret found the answer in the Black Ledger. A recent payment had been made to a private research institute under a project called Crown Dependency Assessment. The attached summary claimed that repeated exposure between exceptional resonance pairs could create escalating behavioral dependence in an alpha. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. Is that true? Margaret shook her head. There is no reliable evidence here. Only theories. Marcus does not need it to be true, Adrian said. He needs the council to believe it could be. Evelyn suddenly saw the next move before anyone said it. Every hour she remained near Adrian could be presented as evidence. Every decision he made in her favor could be called influence. Every conversation between them could strengthen Marcus's argument. I have to leave the palace. Adrian's wolf stirred at the words, but Adrian's expression did not change. If that is what you choose, no one will stop you. Evelyn searched his face, almost expecting resistance. Even before the hearing? Especially before the hearing. Reed objected. Your Majesty, she is the central witness. Then she can testify by her own decision, not because we can find her here. Evelyn understood what Adrian was doing. Marcus had built his entire strategy around the assumption that resonance would remove choice. Adrian was refusing to give him that proof. I am not running, she said. I know. I want to find my mother. Margaret looked sharply at her. Evelyn held up the pendant. Sarah left directions in music because she expected someone to follow them. If she survived, the rest of the hymn may lead to her. Adrian walked to the archive door and opened it himself. Then find the truth Marcus could not erase. Evelyn stepped into the corridor, then stopped. What will you tell the council? Adrian looked back toward the files documenting 20 years of manipulation. That the Omega they claim controls me just walked away, and I let her. For the first time since the Judgment Square, Evelyn smiled faintly. Then she left. By sunrise, she was traveling north with copies of Sarah's musical notes and no royal escort. At 9 o'clock, Marcus entered the council chamber expecting Evelyn to be standing beside the king. Her chair was empty. Where is she? He demanded. Adrian took his seat at the head of the chamber. Wherever she chooses to be. Marcus's confidence faltered for only a second. Adrian noticed. Hundreds of miles away, Evelyn followed the final notes of the hymn toward a mountain town named Silver Creek. At the local records office, an elderly clerk examined Sarah's crescent symbol and quietly handed Evelyn an address. The house stood 3 miles outside town. Evelyn arrived near sunset and knocked. A woman with silver hair opened the door. She looked at Evelyn, dropped the cup in her hand, and whispered the name she had not spoken in 15 years. My daughter. For several seconds, neither woman moved. Evelyn had imagined this moment in 100 different ways during the 15 years since Sarah disappeared, but none of those imagined reunions had prepared her for the woman standing in the doorway. Sarah was older now. Her chestnut hair turned almost completely silver, yet her eyes were exactly as Evelyn remembered them. You are alive, Evelyn whispered. Sarah covered her mouth, struggling to steady herself. I prayed you would never have to find me. The words struck harder than Evelyn expected. I spent 15 years believing you were gone. Sarah stepped aside and invited her into the small house. Evelyn remained near the door. Then tell me why. Sarah looked at the crescent pendant around her daughter's neck and understood immediately how much had already been uncovered. Marcus found you. He did more than find me. He accused me of treason and arranged a public judgment because he wanted me to sing. Sarah closed her eyes. Then he finally completed the test. Evelyn felt anger rise beneath her confusion. You knew this could happen? I knew he would keep searching for a way to prove the connection between you and Adrian. Sarah led her to a study filled with old notebooks and locked wooden boxes. 20 years ago, Marcus believed the royal family could be stabilized by pairing each future ruler with an Omega whose voice produced exceptional resonance. He called it protection. I called it ownership disguised as science. Evelyn thought of Adrian sitting before the council without her. Adrian does not believe that. Sarah looked surprised. You met him? His wolf responded when I sang. Fear crossed Sarah's face. Then you must stay away from him. Evelyn shook her head. That is exactly what Marcus expects everyone to believe. Adrian let me leave the palace without an argument. If this connection controls him, why would he do that? Sarah had no immediate answer. Evelyn placed copies of the Black Ledger records on the desk. Marcus has spent years studying both of us. I need evidence strong enough to expose him. Sarah slowly unlocked one of the wooden boxes. Inside were dozens of handwritten musical pages. The hymn was never meant to be a death song, she said. Our ancestors used it to preserve information when written records could be confiscated. Every verse contains a second structure beneath the melody. Evelyn remembered the hidden chapel. A cipher. Sarah nodded. The version I taught you contains the location of the original Crescent Circle archive. Evelyn stared at her. Why teach that to a child? Because I knew memory might survive where documents would not. Sarah's voice became quiet. And because I was afraid I would not be there when you needed it. Evelyn looked away. You were not. The truth landed between them without cruelty, which somehow made it heavier. Sarah accepted it. I thought disappearing would protect you. It protected me until Marcus decided he needed me again. Sarah opened another box and removed a sealed envelope. Then we finished what I failed to finish. Inside was an original directive signed by Marcus Hale authorizing the childhood resonance test involving Evelyn and Adrian. Attached to it was a second document Evelyn had never seen. It ordered Sarah's permanent removal from royal service and authorized surveillance of Evelyn until adulthood. This proves he targeted us, Evelyn said. It proves more than that. Sarah unfolded the final page. Marcus had written detailed instructions for a future public confirmation event, including a recommendation that emotional distress be used to encourage spontaneous singing. Evelyn felt the judgment square return in her memory. The crowd, the silence, the certainty that her life was ending. Every detail had been anticipated years earlier. Her phone rang. Adrian's name appeared on the screen. Evelyn answered immediately. The council suspended the Independence Act, he said. His voice remained controlled. Marcus has 48 hours to prove I am compromised. If he succeeds, the council can place the crown under temporary oversight. Evelyn looked at Sarah and the documents covering the desk. I found my mother. Silence followed. Then Adrian answered softly. I am glad. No demand. No order to return. Evelyn understood again why Marcus's theory was already beginning to collapse. Adrian, we found his original plan. Can you prove he arranged what happened in the square? Evelyn looked at the final page. Yes. Sarah suddenly reached for another sheet hidden beneath the directive. Her expression changed. Evelyn, wait. She turned the document around. At the bottom was a contingency order written by Marcus. If the adult subjects resist assigned proximity, initiate separation protocol, and present the Omega as the source of royal instability. Evelyn stared at the words. Marcus had planned for this too, and by leaving Adrian, she had just activated the final stage of his strategy. Evelyn read the contingency order 3 times before the trap became clear. Marcus had built a strategy in which every choice could be presented as proof of his theory. If she stayed near Adrian, he would claim the king had become dependent on her. If she left, he would blame her absence for any instability that followed. He designed an argument that cannot be disproved by behavior alone, Sarah said. Evelyn looked at the phone still pressed to her ear. Adrian, Marcus has a separation protocol. He expected me to leave. I assumed he would have a second strategy, Adrian replied. Then do not give him the reaction he wants. Evelyn heard the calm in his voice. What is happening there? Marcus requested continuous medical observation of me until the council hearing. And you agreed? Yes. Evelyn understood immediately. Adrian was creating an independent record of his behavior while she remained hundreds of miles away. If his judgment, sleep, and control remained stable, Marcus would lose the foundation of his dependency claim. He will manipulate the results, Sarah warned after Evelyn placed the call on speaker. Adrian answered without hesitation. That is why I selected physicians with no connection to the council or the crown. Sarah looked at Evelyn, surprised again by a king who seemed determined to dismantle every assumption Marcus had made about him. Reed joined the call from the palace records office. We have another problem. Marcus released a statement claiming Evelyn fled after influencing the king to suspend a lawful sentence. Evelyn almost laughed at the absurdity. I left with the king's permission. We can prove that, Reed said. but Marcus is controlling the first version of the story. Sarah opened the original directive again. Then we need something stronger than documents he can call fabricated. Evelyn looked toward the musical pages. The archive. Sarah became still. The original Crescent Circle archive contains recorded testimony from the women Marcus tried to recruit. If it survived, their statements would establish the history of the program. Where is it? Evelyn asked. Sarah pointed toward the death hymn. The final verse is the map. They spent the next hour translating the hidden pattern. The notes identified an abandoned meeting hall beneath the old courthouse in Silver Creek, less than 2 miles away. Evelyn and Sarah arrived shortly before midnight. Behind a false wall in the basement, they found a steel cabinet sealed with the crescent symbol. Inside were dozens of recordings, photographs, research files, and signed testimonies. One recording carried a date from 20 years earlier and Sarah's name. Evelyn played it. Her mother's younger voice filled the room. Marcus Hale has ordered a public confirmation test for the future. He intends to create emotional circumstances severe enough to trigger the Carter heirs inherited him and force a response from Crown heir Adrian Blackwood. Evelyn stopped breathing for a moment. The recording continued. If this testimony is ever heard, understand this clearly. Resonance does not create obedience. It does not create ownership. Any claim otherwise is being used to justify control. Sarah stood silently beside her daughter, hearing her own warning return after 2 decades. Evelyn immediately sent authenticated copies to Reed through a secure channel. Minutes later, he confirmed receipt. This changes the hearing. Not enough, Adrian said through the call. Marcus will argue Sarah was a political opponent. Evelyn looked deeper into the cabinet. Then we give the council his own voice. At the back sat a recording labeled Final Confirmation Planning. Sarah stared at it. I never made that recording. Evelyn pressed play. Marcus's younger voice emerged clearly, discussing the future judgment scenario with 2 program officials. He described the public square, the accusation, the emotional pressure, even the expectation that Adrian would intervene after hearing the hymn. The plan Evelyn had lived through had been recorded 20 years before it happened. Reed spoke first. We have him. Evelyn should have felt relief, but another sentence followed on the recording. Marcus instructed that if the plan was exposed, all original evidence inside the Royal Council chamber was to be removed before the final hearing. Evelyn looked at the time. The hearing was scheduled for the following morning. Adrian, where is Marcus now? Silence followed as Reed checked palace security records. His answer came seconds later. He entered the council chamber 10 minutes ago. Evelyn looked at Sarah. The final evidence had been hidden in the one place Marcus still controlled, and he was already moving to erase it. Adrian did not order Marcus removed from the council chamber. Doing so would give the chancellor exactly what he needed. Another decision he could describe as irrational behavior caused by Evelyn's influence. Instead, Adrian contacted the palace security director and issued a narrower command. Preserve every entry and exit record from the council wing. No one removes property without written authorization. Reed understood immediately. You are letting him believe he has time. I am letting him create evidence. Hundreds of miles away, Evelyn listened through the secure call while Sarah organized the original recordings for transport. Evelyn wanted to return immediately, but the earliest flight would not place her near the capital until shortly before the hearing. I can send everything electronically, she said. Send copies, Adrian replied. Keep the originals with you. Marcus may destroy whatever is hidden in the chamber. Then we document what he destroys. At the palace, security records showed Marcus remained inside the council chamber for 37 minutes. When he emerged, he carried nothing. Yet an environmental monitoring system recorded that a concealed archival compartment beneath the central floor had been opened for the first time in 11 years. Reed discovered the access record at 2 in the morning. He found something. Adrian studied the chamber plans. The compartment had been installed during renovations 22 years earlier, when Marcus served as deputy director of royal security. Can we access it without alerting him? Not before the hearing. Adrian considered the problem. Then we do not. Reed looked surprised. Your Majesty? If Marcus believes he destroyed the only evidence, he will speak with confidence tomorrow. Confidence makes people careless. Meanwhile, Evelyn and Sarah drove toward the regional airport with the original Crescent Circle archive secured in 2 locked cases. During the drive, Sarah finally explained why she had remained hidden for 15 years. Marcus had threatened to reopen Evelyn's childhood classification if Sarah returned. At the time, Sarah believed distance was the only protection she could offer. "I made the decision for you," she admitted. "I told myself it was necessary." Evelyn looked through the passenger window at the dark highway. "You were trying to protect me. That does not mean I chose correctly." Evelyn appreciated the difference. "Then help me make my own choice now." Sarah nodded. "What do you want?" Evelyn answered without hesitation. "I want to go back." By sunrise, the palace was surrounded by reporters and citizens waiting for the council's decision. Marcus entered the chamber appearing calm. Adrian was already seated, alone except for his legal advisor. Evelyn's chair remained empty. Marcus began by presenting the separation protocol as evidence that Adrian's recent decisions had been shaped by unusual biological influence. "The Omega disappeared," Marcus declared. "Yet the king continues reorganizing security, reopening sealed archives, and challenging established council authority because of her." Adrian listened without interruption. When Marcus finished, he placed a medical report on the table. 48 hours of independent observation showed no deterioration in judgment, no unusual behavioral instability, and no loss of control, while Evelyn remained far away. Marcus barely reacted. "Absence does not eliminate psychological dependency." "Then perhaps evidence will," Adrian said. The chamber doors opened. Evelyn entered beside Sarah Carter, carrying one of the locked archive cases. Every council member turned. Marcus's expression finally changed. Evelyn walked to the center of the chamber without approaching Adrian. She placed the case on the evidence table. "I returned because I chose to testify." Marcus recovered quickly. "Your presence itself proves the connection." Evelyn looked directly at him. "Then explain why I left when the king could have ordered me to stay." Marcus had no immediate answer. Sarah placed the original directive beside the recordings. Reed then presented the security log from the previous night. Chancellor Hale entered this chamber after midnight and accessed a concealed archive compartment. Marcus stood. "I was securing sensitive historical materials." Adrian finally spoke. "What materials?" Silence spread across the room. Marcus looked toward the floor beneath the central table. Evelyn followed his gaze and remembered the hidden structure inside the hymn. The final verse was not merely a map to Silver Creek. Its rhythm matched the old architectural measurements of the council chamber. She suddenly understood. "The evidence was never inside the compartment," she said. Everyone turned toward her. Evelyn quietly recited the final musical sequence, counting the intervals. 3 steps east. 7 feet from the royal seal. Beneath the first foundation stone. Adrian looked at Reed. The captain checked the location indicated by the pattern and found a narrow preservation panel built into the original wall. Inside sat a sealed metal container untouched by Marcus's midnight search. Marcus stared at it as all confidence disappeared from his face. Sarah whispered. He searched the hiding place he created. Evelyn looked at the crescent symbol engraved on the container. But my mother used the hiding place he never knew existed. Reed opened the container and removed the original program charter. On the final page were the signatures of every founder and every official who later attempted to control the crescent circle. At the bottom, beside the authorization for the public confirmation experiment, was Marcus Hale's signature. This time, there were no redactions. For several seconds, the only sound in the council chamber came from pages turning beneath Reed's hands. The original charter documented everything Marcus had spent 20 years hiding: the childhood observation program, the unauthorized compatibility tests, the manipulation of Evelyn's designation records, and the planned public confirmation experiment. Marcus remained standing at the far end of the table, but the certainty that had carried him into the hearing was gone. "Historical documents do not prove current misconduct," he said. Evelyn had expected that argument. She opened the locked case and removed the recording recovered in Silver Creek. "Then perhaps your own voice will." Reed authenticated the recording before playing it for the council. Marcus's younger voice filled the chamber, calmly describing how emotional distress could be used to trigger Evelyn's inherited him and create a public reaction from Adrian. Several council members exchanged stunned looks as the details matched the judgment square almost perfectly. When the recording ended, Marcus immediately objected. "A 20-year-old discussion is not evidence that I arranged recent events." "Correct," Adrian said. Marcus looked toward him, briefly surprised by the agreement. Adrian placed the black ledger on the table. That is why we also have the payments. Reed presented the financial records connecting Marcus's private foundations to the officer who submitted the false evidence against Evelyn. The authorization numbers matched her arrest file. The payment dates matched every major step of the case. Marcus tried to argue that the transactions were legitimate security expenses, but Sarah produced the original surveillance order bearing his signature. Then Margaret Ellis entered the chamber and testified that Marcus had personally instructed her to destroy Evelyn's pendant if Sarah ever returned. The story Marcus had constructed began collapsing under the weight of evidence from people who had never coordinated their lives around defeating him. Evelyn watched him carefully. She expected anger. Instead, she saw something more revealing: disbelief. Marcus had spent so many years predicting everyone's behavior that he had forgotten people could change. Sarah had returned. Margaret had kept the pendant. Adrian had allowed Evelyn to leave. Evelyn had chosen to come back. Every decision Marcus had considered impossible had become part of the case against him. "You believe you have proven manipulation," Marcus said, turning toward the council. "But none of this changes the biological reality." The king's wolf responded to her. "That connection exists." Evelyn stepped forward. "Yes, it exists." The room became silent. Marcus almost smiled. "Then you admit it." "I admit my voice affects his wolf. I do not admit that this gives you, the council, the crown, or even the king ownership over my life." Adrian remained seated, allowing her words to stand without adding his authority to them. Evelyn continued. "You built your entire system on one assumption. You believed a connection automatically creates control. But I left this palace by choice." The king remained stable. "I returned by choice. No one summoned me. No instinct forced me through those doors." Marcus looked toward Adrian. "And you expect us to believe the king feels nothing?" Adrian finally stood. Feeling something and surrendering judgment are not the same thing. His wolf stirred at Evelyn's presence, unmistakably aware of her, but Adrian did not move closer. "For 20 years, you studied my instincts because you believed they could make decisions for me. You were wrong." The senior council member requested an immediate vote. Marcus Hale was suspended from all authority pending a full independent investigation. Every active order connected to Evelyn's judgment was canceled, and her treason case was formally reopened under external review. Marcus looked around the chamber as one hand after another rose against him. No dramatic confrontation followed. No threat could erase documents carrying his signature. When palace security asked him to surrender his council credentials, he did so in silence. Evelyn watched him leave through the same door she had entered freely less than an hour earlier. She expected relief to arrive immediately, but what she felt was quieter. The truth had won, yet 20 years of decisions could not disappear in one morning. Adrian approached only after the chamber had nearly emptied, stopping several feet away. "Your judgment order has been revoked." Evelyn looked at him. "And what happens to me now?" Adrian's answer came without hesitation. "Whatever you decide happens next." Sarah watched from across the room as Evelyn absorbed those words. For most of her life, other people had hidden her identity, classified her abilities, predicted her future, or tried to protect her by making choices in her place. Now the most powerful man in the kingdom was offering her something Marcus had never understood. Nothing. No command. No claim. No predetermined path. Evelyn looked toward the council table where the death hymn had finally revealed its last secret. Then Reed returned carrying a newly discovered document from Marcus's private archive. "There is one more problem," he said. Adrian opened the file. It contained a list of 23 living Omegas whose families had been monitored by the program. Evelyn's name was only one among them. The conspiracy had not ended with Marcus. Somewhere beyond the palace, the system he created was still operating. The list of 23 names remained on the council table long after Marcus was escorted from the chamber. Each name represented another life observed, classified, and quietly shaped by a system most of the kingdom did not know existed. Evelyn read the pages slowly. Some subjects had been monitored since childhood. Others had families whose records stretched back generations. "We cannot simply publish this," she said. Reed looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because these people did not choose to have their identities exposed." Adrian nodded immediately. "Then their privacy remains protected." Sarah looked at her daughter with quiet recognition. Years earlier, she had tried to protect Evelyn by disappearing and making decisions without her. Evelyn was choosing a different path. Protection would begin with consent. An independent investigation was established before sunset. The 23 individuals would be contacted privately, informed of the records, and given control over whether their information could be used in public proceedings. Every remaining Resonance program file was placed under external oversight. Adrian also ordered his own childhood records released to investigators. Several advisors objected, warning that exposing the Crown's involvement could damage public confidence. Confidence built on hidden experiments deserves to be questioned, Adrian replied. Evelyn heard about the decision later that evening. She had returned to the old chapel with Sarah, not because anyone required her presence, but because she wanted to understand the history her family had carried. Together, they sorted the Crescent Circle journals into two groups: records belonging to history and personal information belonging to living people. Sarah watched Evelyn place another sealed file into the private collection. "You are doing what I should have done," she said. Evelyn looked at her. "You were afraid. So were you." "I still am." Sarah smiled sadly. "You simply stopped letting fear make every decision." Footsteps sounded near the chapel entrance. Adrian appeared but remained outside the hidden chamber. "May I come in?" Evelyn noticed Sarah's surprise at the question. "Yes." Adrian entered carrying the original Royal Independence Act. The council had voted again after Marcus's suspension. This time, the act had passed. The Crown would no longer be subject to emergency oversight based solely on unverified claims of biological influence. More importantly, a second measure had been introduced protecting Omegas from compulsory classification based on resonance abilities. "The law still needs final review," Adrian said. "But it is a beginning." Evelyn studied him. "You could have used what happened to strengthen your own authority. That would make me another man using your story for power." His answer was simple, and because of that, she believed him. Sarah quietly moved toward the shelves, leaving them space without announcing that she was doing so. Evelyn looked at the musical pages spread across the table. "My entire life, people told me this song was dangerous." "It was dangerous," Adrian said, "to people who needed its meaning to remain hidden." His wolf recognized Evelyn's presence, but the response was no longer frightening to either of them. It existed without becoming an order. Evelyn looked toward him. "What happens if I decide to leave again?" "You leave. And if I stay?" Adrian paused. "Then I hope you stay because this place becomes somewhere you want to be." Evelyn felt something inside her settle. Not destiny, not obligation. Something quieter and far more difficult to manufacture. Trust. 3 weeks later, the independent investigators located 17 of the 23 people on Marcus's list. 11 agreed to provide testimony. 4 requested complete privacy. 2 wanted their records permanently destroyed after the investigation. Every choice was honored. The remaining 6 names led to an organization operating beyond the capital under a different title but using the same Crescent classification codes. Reed brought the discovery to Adrian and Evelyn one cold evening. Marcus did not control the entire network, he explained. He was protecting one branch of it. Evelyn examined the documents. The organization had continued collecting family histories and predicting resonance compatibility long after Sarah disappeared. Adrian looked at her. "You are not required to be part of what comes next." Evelyn remembered standing in the Judgment Square, believing she had no future beyond the next few minutes. Now an entire road stretched before her, and for once, nobody else had written the destination. She closed the file. "I know." Adrian waited. Evelyn placed her hand over the list of hidden families. "That is why I am choosing to help." Outside the chapel, the evening bells began to ring. Sarah looked toward her daughter as Evelyn opened the next file willingly. The song that had once seemed to mark the end of her life had become the key to uncovering a system built on stolen choices. And now, for the first time, the people inside those records would be allowed to decide how their own stories ended. 6 months later, the Judgment Square looked smaller than Evelyn remembered. Perhaps the stone walls had never been as enormous as they seemed on the morning she believed her life was ending. Perhaps fear had simply made everything around her feel impossible to escape. Now the barriers were gone. Families filled the square freely, while representatives from across the kingdom gathered to witness the signing of the Freedom of Classification Act. The law prohibited forced resonance testing, ended compulsory designation disclosure, and gave every living person discovered in the old program complete authority over their private records. Marcus Hale remained under independent investigation, while the organization connected to his network had been dismantled through testimony, financial evidence, and the cooperation of people who had once been treated as subjects instead of human beings. Evelyn stood near the fountain with Sarah beside her. Their relationship had not repaired itself overnight. 15 missing years could not be erased by one reunion. They had argued. They had cried. They had sat through long silences without knowing what to say. But Sarah had stopped making decisions for her daughter, and Evelyn had stopped pretending forgiveness needed to happen all at once. They were learning each other again. Across the square, Adrian finished signing the new law and handed the document to the Independent Oversight Commission rather than keeping it as a royal symbol. He wore no ceremonial crown. When the formal proceedings ended, he stepped down from the platform and disappeared into the crowd. Evelyn noticed him walking toward her, but did not move. He stopped several feet away, exactly as he had learned to do from the beginning. "You could stand closer," she said. Adrian smiled. "I was waiting to be invited." Evelyn shook her head with quiet amusement. "You are impossible. I have been called worse." His wolf stirred when she smiled, but neither of them feared the response anymore. During the past 6 months, Adrian had worked with independent specialists to understand his instincts without treating Evelyn as medicine for them. Evelyn had traveled twice without him, once with Sarah and once entirely alone. Every separation had proved what Marcus never understood. Connection could survive freedom. It did not need captivity to remain real. The bells above the square began ringing at noon. Evelyn looked toward the place where she had once stood waiting for a sentence to be completed. "I want to do something." Adrian followed her gaze. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She walked toward the center of the square. Conversations gradually faded as people recognized her. Sarah remained beside the fountain. Adrian stayed among the crowd. No one stood above Evelyn now. No council member commanded her to speak. No judgment required a final song. Evelyn closed her eyes and began the melody her mother had taught her 20 years earlier. The first notes carried across the square. Adrian's wolf recognized them instantly. A low howl rose from somewhere deep within him, but Adrian remained where he was. This time, no one panicked. Evelyn continued singing. The ancient hymn no longer sounded like a farewell. The crescent circle had recovered verses lost for generations, and Sarah had helped Evelyn understand their original meaning. The song had never belonged to death. It had been written by people determined to preserve truth when powerful institutions tried to erase their voices. When Evelyn reached the final note, silence held the square for one long moment before the bells continued above them. She opened her eyes. Adrian was still waiting in the crowd. He did not call her name. He did not reach for her. He simply waited. Evelyn thought about the little girl beside the palace fountain, the young woman standing under judgment, and every version of herself whose future had been predicted by someone else. Then she walked toward Adrian. Not because an ancient program had matched their names. Not because his wolf recognized her voice. Not because history expected them to complete a story written before either of them could choose. She walked toward him because she wanted to. Adrian offered his hand without taking hers first. Evelyn looked at it, smiled, and placed her hand in his. Together, they walked away from the center of the square, while Sarah watched with tears in her eyes. Behind them stood a kingdom finally learning that protection without consent could become another kind of prison, that instinct did not outrank choice, and that no bond was meaningful unless both people were free to walk away. Evelyn had once sung believing the song marked the final moment of her life. Now she understood why her mother had preserved it. Some songs were not written for endings. Some were carried through darkness until someone became free enough to choose what came next.